From the mind of the stranger, I bring you the Amber Island Mystery. Have you ever felt strange in a place you visited? Maybe you felt cold or disconnected from yourself. That lurching feeling that something is coming for you. That's how folks describe Amber Island, an empty and desolate place just off the coast of South Korea. They called it that because of the single lighthouse that rested atop that barren rock. On its peak was a foreboding lamp that turned in circles for hours. Its light branched a deep amber color. People used to be unafraid of this place. That wasn't until the disappearances started popping up. First it was sailboats that had washed ashore with no driver aboard. Then eventually, whole ships started disappearing without even a trace of where they went. Still, they needed keepers to watch the lighthouse. If not, our ships would not be able to make it to port safely. Near the end of summer, 3 keepers were assigned to the lighthouse. A week went by before anyone else came to that island. Upon arrival, the lighthouse was empty, with only a few toppled-over chairs and overturned bedsheets to indicate where the keepers could have gone. As the police arrived on the scene, they realized that nothing else had been moved or altered. Where could they have gone? It wasn't until one of the officers tripped on a piece of floorboard that they got their answer. There was a little hole dug under the floor with an object covered in dirt hiding there. The officer picked it up and examined it. It was a journal. He showed it to the other officers as they were putting on their diving suits to check the water around the island for bodies. They advised him to read over its contents and let them know what he found. He sat down and started reading. August 3rd, 2021. Today I arrived at the island, joined by my colleagues. They told me their names were Dae-sung and Sung-hoon. Dae-sung is a bulky man with wide shoulders and arms that were sturdier than tree trunks. He's been giving us attitude every time we tell him to do something. He doesn't seem to work well with people. Sung-hoon, on the other hand, is a skinny man who has a love for teaching others. He also, surprisingly, enjoys getting work done around the lighthouse despite its downfalls. As for who I am, my friends call me Jae-hoon. My initial thoughts in this place were that it looked quiet, like a bird could chirp in the morning and it'd be the loudest thing you've heard in days. I don't mind it though. I like the quiet. It reminds me of when I used to take long walks in my neighborhood. Apart from all the water surrounding us, it looks like the other keepers are getting ready to bring their stuff inside. I will update this log within the upcoming days. August 5th, 2021. There was a little girl outside. We saw her just through the window in the raging storm. Even with the rain pouring over her hair and face, she did nothing but stand there and look at the lighthouse. After we saw her, I ran out and quickly ushered her inside. When I asked if she was okay, she only responded with, "Can you help me find my mom?" I looked at her confused. I asked her where her mom might have gone, to which she replied with, "She's somewhere at the bottom of the ocean." Sung-hoon came over and told the little girl that they would call emergency services in order to help her find her mom. He pointed to Dae-sung and told him to get the phone so they could contact someone. With a grunt, he reluctantly agreed. As he picked up the phone, however, nothing but static could be heard from the other end. Upon fidgeting with the dials for a few minutes, Dae-sung realized that the phone was dead. Sung-hoon and I both pulled out our phones only to realize they were dead too. I decided to check our power supply, only to realize we had none. Our electricity was completely out, which meant we couldn't even charge our phones to call the Coast Guard. We looked at each other puzzled as to what we should do next. Our next shipment of supplies wouldn't be for another 5 days. The only thing we can do now is wait until then. In the meantime, we will be taking care of the child until the proper authorities can be contacted. What is most peculiar about her, I might add, is her eyes. They are amber colored, just like the light atop the lighthouse. August 6th, 2021. Dae-sung is not himself anymore. I can't even describe what I just witnessed. What happened to him? He went to his room to eat since Sung-hoon and I decided to eat later. I just all of a sudden heard screaming coming from his room. I opened the door to see what was wrong, only to realize what had happened to his body. His face was becoming rounder as his nose stuck out to a point. He kept screaming, "What's happening to me?" as his eyes shrunk and became black beady dots. His skin then turned blue as his limbs started folding and contracting. A large chunk of flesh began protruding from his back. Just like his nose, the flesh also stuck out to a point. You could hear the meshing of bone and tissue from inside him. I gazed into his mouth and saw that he was growing rows of teeth. As Daesung screamed in agony, I could finally make out what was happening to him. It looked like he was turning into a shark. By the time the transformation was complete, Daesung was nothing but a mindless creature. I collapsed to my knees, holding the side of the doorframe for support. I couldn't fathom the sight of it. Sung-hoon came from behind me and saw the shark. He asked how that thing got in here. I couldn't speak. He then asked where Daesung was. I remained silent. My body was in shock. That shark is still in that room. I don't know what I'm going to tell Sung-hoon. I'm terrified. August 7th, 2021. We sat down at the dinner table with the little girl. Even though our electricity is still out, we managed to cook some things using an old wooden coal stove from the basement. I still hadn't told Sung-hoon about Daesung. He wouldn't believe me if I told him. Now my gut churns just thinking about what happened. I asked him what our meal was made of. He said it was shark. I proceeded to ask him what he meant, and he told me he decided to cook the shark we found in that room. He said he just wanted to get rid of it. I threw up in my mouth. As I got up, Sung-hoon looked confused. I didn't want to eat, not even a bite. Then Sung-hoon said something that will not leave my head no matter how hard I try. If you're worried about finding Daesung, I wouldn't fret. He's bound to pop up eventually, he said as he ate a huge chunk of the shark. I then looked over to the girl, trying not to make eye contact with Sung-hoon. She was eating it gleefully. August 8th, 2021. It happened again. I woke up and went into Sung-hoon's room for a chat. He looked fine at first, then as we were talking I noticed something was off. Sung-hoon's skin was grayer than usual. It was as if he were turning into a clump of mold. I asked him about this, and he said he might just be sick. That's when his arms fell off. Sung-hoon panicked and tried to pick them up with his feet. I watched as they began to dissolve on the floor. Within a few seconds, his arms had become a puddle of water. Sung-hoon then collapsed to the ground as his legs began fusing together. They did so until they were just one long appendage on his lower body. I could hear that same awful churning of flesh. As the screaming abruptly stopped, I realized what had happened. Sung-hoon was now an eel. I left the room immediately as I heard the creature hitting the floor. I would not look at it again. As I sped down the small corridor, I crossed paths with the little girl. She looked at me puzzled. I knew I looked terrified. She asked me what was wrong, to which all I could say was nothing. I threw the eel into the ocean. There was nothing else I could do. August 9th, 2021. I don't have much time left. I just noticed the weird lumps on my torso. At first I thought it was my stomach after finally being able to eat. It wasn't. I lifted up my shirt to see 4 red tendrils protruding out. There are suction cups growing on them. I've also noticed that my head is getting larger and my eyes are spreading farther apart. I'm afraid that in just a few moments, I won't be human anymore. For anyone reading this, I beg you to help the little girl. She told me her name is Yoon. Her father, from what she told me, is named Hyun Ho. Please, make sure she's safe. The officer put down the journal in bewilderment. There was no sign of a little girl here. What was even stranger was that the last entry was written just yesterday. If this were the case, there surely would have been more signs of recent activity. Yet despite this, there was almost nothing. And then the officer realized something. Jae-hoon had mentioned that he had eaten in the last entry. Perhaps there were more clues as to what happened in the kitchen. The officer walked into the room and started examining the contents of the cabinets. He eventually made it to the pots and pans, which were old and worn out from constant use. Upon further inspection, something was off with these appliances. It looked like they had been thrown in there instead of being organized. Why would the keepers bang around their only set of pots and pans? The officer pulled one of the pots out and looked at it. There was some kind of algae growing on it. At first he thought it was mold, but if that were the case, that would mean the pot was not used recently, which it was. All of a sudden, the officer shot up and ran back to the journal. He had remembered something. It was just as he thought. Right before each keeper began transforming, they had recently eaten. Someone was putting something in their food. The officer searched for his radio, which he had left on the shelf in the other room. He found it and radioed in to the other officers, who were still under the sea searching for bodies. There was no response. Even though he kept trying, the officer couldn't seem to reach anyone. He then went to his computer and searched for their body cam footage. Only one of the cameras still worked. The footage was live, however it looked to be in a place he couldn't recognize. It was an empty abyss, assumably in a deep part of the ocean. In the distance, only darkness could be seen beyond the camera's dim LED light. Something started moving from far away. As it got closer, the figure looked to be a man in an old standard diving dress. His movements were reminiscent of walking, though very slowly. As the figure came into full view, something could be heard over the radio. "Mommy and Daddy are here," a little girl's voice said. Suddenly, the darkness above the figure began to move as well. A faint light poured out from the darkness as it was revealed to be a giant amber-colored eyeball. It stared into the camera motionless. Then the footage cut off. The officer was left with nothing but a blank screen. Nothing ever came of that incident. The officers who went into the water were not seen again, nor were the keepers. Amber Island will always be filled with its secrets. Though theories vary, no one can pinpoint exactly what happened that day. Rumors began to circulate among the residents that lived off the coastline. The most intriguing of them was this. They say that if you look into the water around the island, you can almost make out that same figure from the depths staring back at you.